Today's guest is Sandra Lopez. Sandra and I met, I don't know, 9 years ago or so at a sporting conference. She was a keynote speaker on the stage, and I introduced myself afterward because I was so impressed with what she said. At the time, she was with Intel, but she's had a variety of high powered, very responsible roles at a number of tech companies, including Macromedia, Computer Associates, Adobe, the aforementioned Intel, and most recently at Microsoft. So rather than go through all of these moments in her career, Sandra, first I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Carl. It's great to be here. And God, you dated us 9 years ago. I don't know if it feels like it's 20 years ago or just yesterday. God, time
Well,
flies.
we're going to go with the latter. It was just yesterday. So what we really want to understand, and what the audience is keen to hear, is as you navigated your way through the tech world, where arguably, as in most industries, it's a male dominated place. And just as obviously, you're not a male, but you managed your career and you figured things out along the way. And clearly, you had leaders or mentors, or in the case of the name of the show, bosses who guided, who helped influence, and who made a mark on you. And those learnings you still carry with you today. So I'm going to let you sort of take it from here, because the most interesting thing, and you'll get to it, is that moment in time where you decided to depart the world of corporate America and go off on your own. So off you go. How'd
There
you
you go.
start? And let's hear the story.
I think I want to start with very few people know that I actually was, when I was kicking off my career when I was young, I was interested in being a fashion designer. And why is that? And it wasn't like I was a great artist. I wasn't a great artist. But what I was really curious was about why people do what they do, or decisions or things that happen around our world that affect us. And so I did fashion for about a year and a half, realized it wasn't for me because I think the greatest influence that you have in the fashion industry is if you're a designer. But I did take engineering courses in college, and I quickly decided, kind of like intuitive with what was happening with society, is like, what is going to change the world? And it was technology. I happened to be born and raised in Silicon Valley before Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley, and I made a career pivot into the tech industry. And so with that, I worked at startups, midsize and large. And really, I think technology, and I know, Carl, you're very intimate in the sports industry. I firmly believe when I started my career in technology that technology was going to be one of those industries that would affect society. Sports does that, media, fashion, music. And so we have seen its effects, both positive and negative, within our society at large. When you sent me the note around you're the best boss ever, I have to tell you, I kind of got triggered. And I was like, boss, God, I haven't heard that word in such a long time. Because for me, over time, it has been much more about, do I place the person as a manager or as a leader? And so boss, in terms of, and I went back and I went to the dictionary, Webster, and it said exercising authority and control. I went there, I was like, okay, because I was just curious, like I haven't heard that word in a long time. However, when I started my career, the term boss was used frequently. And I know the meaning in terms of who are those individuals that have had an influence in your career. And I took it into two buckets. There has been bosses that really taught me what type of boss not to be, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then there was this other type of boss that saw something in me that I never even saw in myself, and placed a bet on me. And I am forever grateful for those individuals. And there's a couple that I want to highlight that saw something in me that I just had no idea that I was capable of doing. But I also want to highlight the importance of, I think, and I think in one of your podcasts, somebody was talking about coaching, and are you coachable? And I think as team members of no matter what type of industry you're working on, it's just observing. I always tend to, and this goes back to like my curiosity around fashion design. That's why I started with it, because I'm always curious to see, like, why do people do what they do? What's the final outcome? And so when I had the boss, and I won't name the person's name, and we were talking about this recently. I was at a girls' weekend, and we were talking about this particular boss. The person would yell all the time. Would come back, go around the halls. Do we know our numbers? Do we know our sell-through? Do we know our metrics? And I understand the importance of outcomes so that you can make adjustments. However, like when we saw this person coming down the hallway, we literally would get up and go out for a walk around the campus to avoid the person. And so what it taught me is that fear-based leadership is not the best way to lead in order to bring followers along. And so I think this person taught me a lot about starting to understand at a very young age what type of leader I should become. And it kind of was a formative years for me. And equally, shortly thereafter, I remember it was during the dot-com bust. There were pink slip parties here in San Francisco. And then I decided to go to New York. And I bought a one-way ticket. I didn't have a job, but I knew I still wanted to stay in tech. I always wanted to live in New York City. And this is when the economy was struggling. And I remember looking for the tech jobs. And at that time, there wasn't like Google. There wasn't all these companies in New York City. And it wasn't like a tech hub, right? And all of a sudden, this gentleman by the Eli Goodrich picked up the phone and called. And I had an interview with him in downtown Manhattan. I remember this vividly. And he was like, happy-go-lucky. He's like, great to meet you, exciting. And we just sat there and we just had a conversation. And it was much more for like marketing, sales, BD, a jack of all trade. And at that time, I was a pure marketer. And so we met, and then shortly thereafter, he knew he wanted to hire me. And he really saw something that I didn't realize, that I could also do sales, that I could also do business development. And he gave me that shot. Like, he opened the door. And I always look back in my history, my career. I'm like, what if that never happened? Where would I be now? Because he opened the door. I landed at Computer Associates. And we were going, I think several months or maybe a year later, we were going through a reorg and we were downsizing. And then he picked up the phone. He's like, to the CMO at the time, like, Nancy Baggett, you really need to bring Sandra Lopez on board. And so she brought me on board. And Nancy taught me the importance of being forward thinking in marketing and excelling at your trade. And so she taught me the importance of excellence. And because of her, I landed back in Silicon Valley and my career just took off over time. But I think about Eli seeing something in me, as well as Nancy really in the world of marketing, embracing innovation and being okay to fail, excellence at your trade and your craft, and really learning it. And you're always learning, the whole notion about being a continuous student. The world of marketing, I think I heard one of your podcasts, like, it used to be, impressions and one to many and linear, really, there was only maybe 4 channels back in the early 2000s that you would use to go reach your audience. And now we live in an omni-channel world. And so as marketers, we must continuously learn and evolve. And we'll talk about, I'm sure, about AI and how that's going to change the game of marketing. And so those 2 individuals, and then I want to leave it with, the CEO at Intel, when we were establishing, and this is where I had an opportunity to meet with you, the sports practice. And he saw something in me that I didn't even realize, but it was running P&L and P&L management. And that really gave me the muscles of becoming a GM and getting closer to, you make direct impact to the bottom line. And because of that, it opened doors to being on private or public boards. And so over time, I landed in a PE-backed private board. But that was because I was closer to the money, and that was because the CEO saw something in me that I didn't necessarily see. That I'm like, I never thought I was like, I'm going to be a CMO. Never did I have in my head that, I could also be a GM.
I can also run a P&L. I can also figure the numbers out, right?
Yeah, and I think what happens in our society is that we get so conditioned, like, this is the pathway. This is what we should be doing. And or people close to you tell you, Sandra, this is what you should be doing, that you get so close-minded and you lose sight of, like, the world of possibilities. And so I think it's always important to explore and talk to people, not only within your inner circle, but sometimes those people that are third degree in separation can see something in you that you don't even see, right? Eli Goodrich didn't even know me, but he saw something in me instinctively, maybe based on his experience, what I was capable of.
Well, right. And that experience that you talked about with Eli and others is really worthy of underscoring because, in my opinion, and I'd love to get your point of view on this, leadership at its core is finding, recruiting, hiring people. And those people become part of a team. But the core core part of leadership, other than finding those people, and one would hope that more often than not, you find the right people to fit into your organization, but it's growing people. It's seeing attributes and capabilities in people that, to your point, Sandra, they don't see themselves, right? I didn't know I could do this. And by the way, when that individual said, do this, I might have even had a little bit of apprehension, or maybe a lot of apprehension about jumping into the deep end of the pool that I had no idea that I could do or even understand.
100%. And I do think that's why when I started, the difference between a manager and leader, just because you're a VP or CVP or CEO or a commissioner doesn't mean that you're actually a leader. There's a difference. And I think to your point, Carl, leadership, it's a people thing. And being able to find those gems, or being able to help somebody through a transition and saying, you may not be in the right role, but I see that you can go here. And we as individuals self-doubt ourselves because we may not believe that we have the capability of doing it, but they see something, they believe in us. And because they believe in us, we eventually over time believe in ourselves. And I observe those that are leaders have these followers that just follow them, whether they go to another company. It's easier when you're trying to do a change management, or you're saying, strategically, we're going to make a pivot, we're going in this direction. How quickly people move in that direction because they believe in that particular person.
And that's a two-way street, right? I mean,
100%.
follower and leader have to have a connection that allows for that relationship to continue to flourish regardless of company or change of company or whatever. I had the experience myself. It was awesome. Worked for the same CEO 3 different times in 3 very different industries. And the fun part of that was, 1, there's commonality. 2, you know each other. 3, you know where strengths and weaknesses are. 4, there's an underlying, I think, requirement, and in my case, a clear distinction of trust. And so even when, despite getting yelled at because do you know your numbers, that's a completely different way of managing than when you get called into the CEO's office and something occurred. And while yelling may not have been the delivery system, you clearly got that you missed it, or, something happened, or why didn't you, or you did, whatever. That's not my point. My point is, regardless of those moments, there's an undeniable link of trust, I think, that is forged. And those followers follow, not just because the individual is a great leader, but because there's a trust factor there that is virtually unbreakable.
Yeah, no, and I 100% agree with you. And your point that you said earlier around like the I got your back is really important. And I'm not going to throw you under the bus. I know, I remember Deborah Conrad, who was the CMO at Intel, what had happened at the company. And I felt like she always had my back. And yet she's tough. I don't think when I say like you have somebody's back, it doesn't mean that you're a weak leader. Actually, you create that trust. And so by doing so, and I always tell people, like, when you create the trust, we as team members are willing to take greater risks. We're not afraid to take risks. We as team leaders are open and transparent on the performance of programs. So I often like to use the red, yellow, green. And green is good. Yellow is, okay, we have some work to do. And red is like, we're in trouble. We got to get red to yellow, yellow to green. And I know that, at least for me in my experience with Deborah Conrad, she wouldn't berate us because we have red. She was actually genuinely curious, like, what's going on? How can I help?
Right.
What do we need to do?
Right.
And I think that's really, really, really important, because no program or no company is going to be running in all green cylinders. There's always going to be something to work on, especially in today's business climate when there's so many things going on. I think it's really important. I think this is like the moment in where we're going to need great leaders to help us kind of navigate very turbulent times within corporations, because a lot of CEOs have never dealt with, Whether you have viruses, whether you have supply chain issues, then you have pricing issues, it's endless and continuous situations that are happening. And so how do you become, and how are you that leader that people want to follow and trust? And I do not believe the leadership of the past where you were berate or, fear-based leadership is going to work nowadays, especially with the younger generation.
No, completely.
Right?
It's a non-starter.
Right. Right. So I think it's really important that we are in a moment where I think empath leadership will be a requirement to drive profitability and growth.
And I think that's right, for sure. You talked about leadership and the individual who suggested, why don't you run a P&L? And I'm not quite sure how that occurred, but I want to talk a little, or I want you to talk about. So marketing is, in the parlance of business and sectors within a company, marketing, my opinion, is probably the least understood because it can be so, on the one hand, formulaic, as you talked about. There's 4 channels and we're going to do what we do in each of those 4 channels, and that's called marketing. On the other hand, it's incredibly creative and innovative because it has to blend the right messaging with the right feature sets, the right audience delivery mechanisms to do what? To support sales, to support growth, so that Sandra can look at her P&L and see that mostly it's green. And,
Right.
I don't have to deal with a bunch of red on the P&L. So, if you at your earliest stage considered yourself a pure marketer, then how did you learn, get taught, experiment to expand the role of a marketer and marketing so that it supported sales and it supported the P&L and it supported the growth initiatives and it supported the market segments that the company's focus, KPIs, and ultimately product delivery systems were targeted?
I really think it's a byproduct of the tech industry that I was born into and evolved in my career. It has always been outcome based. And so because it was outcome based, you could begin to tie things to revenue. And so from my standpoint, it was an easier kind of pivot, right? I also believe when we were all the evolution of marketing going back to the tech industry, it has always seemed like marketing has always been in service to. It's either in service to the product or service to sales. And so because of that, marketing has always collaborated with sales very closely. Deborah Conrad, our CMO at Intel, brilliant at collaboration with product, finance, and sales. And so it goes back to like how we started. Like I observed these people. I'm like, wow, that person has an outstanding relationship with these sister organizations. And I observed how she did it and her approach. And so marketing was never combative with sales. It was never combative with product. It was always in service to the larger mission and goal that was set forth by the executive committee. And so I think I have been so fortunate enough and so grateful to have outstanding teachers that taught me the importance of getting close to product, the importance of outcome based. So for every dollar you spend, what are the results? Even when it's not so quantifiable, like how can you quantify it? And then I would say most recently in my career, when I became like a VP and in the business unit, what I started to learn about marketing is that people would never truly understand the value that we would bring. Right. And that I started to translate things into like CFO language. So instead of brand awareness is how do you increase market valuation? And so I always would go like the objective is in a way that a CFO can understand. And then I would back end it and say, okay, how can we track this so we can show meaningful results?
Right.
So, but that helps tremendously. And I think when we go into, let's take, for example, something very tactical. Hey, we need money for search engine marketing. Well, as a CFO, would be like, okay, well, you have your website and you have SEO optimization. And how about you translate it? Well, it's really about how do we captivate a greater share of the market. And here's what we're able to do in the area of like we want to spend money on like search engine marketing. It's easier to understand. And so I think as marketers, what we have to do is, this is my whole new thing over the past years, really start to think like a CFO and translate like a CFO.
Right.
And I saw that like firsthand when I was like on the business unit side, the importance of that, because we get stuck in our own terminology of marketing lingo. And I just think that the more we translate it to CFO language, and I do think that CMOs are presidents, right? We just came out of South by and we were having this conversation, and CMOs have to generate revenue and manage costs, the MarTech stack, all the technology that actually hits our P&L. And so why aren't we presidents? Why aren't we viewed as GMs of a business unit? And I think we need to start to maybe redefine what a CMO is in today's world and what we're responsible.
Well, I think that's 100% accurate. I mean, let's be clear. CMOs and historically marketing by the CFO has always been viewed as a cost center. So now one has to, from a marketing perspective, be able to explain, point to, track how marketing spend actually does generate revenue, whether it's in support of product or in support of sales, or in some instances generates passive revenue because of positioning of a product or service in the marketplace, and it's an automated buy. So those kinds of things are fairly recent in our world, right? That hasn't always been the case. I mean, automated sales is great if you can wake up tomorrow morning and, open a dashboard and go, hey, in the last 24 hours, we just generated XYZ revenue. That's a panacea to a certain degree. Nonetheless, it's an aspect and it's part of a broader mission that the marketing function has, not only to clearly explain what that marketing spend in the various categories of spend will generate in revenue or support the product or support the sales organization, but at the end of the day, it's my opinion, it's an integral ingredient in a broader recipe for growth and success, innovation and creativity in all facets. And it's a unique CFO in my experience, Sandra, who actually understands what I just said and what you're about to say, and then is willing to, even if there's some doubt or say it another way, slight lack of clarity, trust the marketing department and what he or she is hearing in the CFO suite to greenlight the spend.
I 100%, Carl, agree with you. And the question is like, how do we best do that? How do we best help the CFO understand that maybe in the world of, like, let's say talk about sports sponsorship, in their head, they're thinking either two things. You just want to slapstick a logo, or you just want to go to the Super Bowl. Right. And I
Or
remember,
you want to go to the Miami Grand Prix.
oh, there you go. And then it's just a boondoggle. So sharing with the CFO that our audience, let's assume it's like a B2C, like our audience that we want to go after is female. And it's, between the ages demographically, 18 to 20, 25. They're very much into following their favorite, athlete, whether it's, basketball or soccer, and you have these attitudinals, and you're like, what the best thing is for us to do is to partner with WNBA or the Valkyries here in San Francisco. And here's why, because we're trying to, one, let them know who we are and the value we bring to this persona's life, whoever this persona is, their segmentation of the person. And when we do that over time, because the CFO wants immediate results, Q1, Q2, short term, and it takes time to condition a human being. One of my old CEOs, Bob Swan, and I will never forget this, and I like to share this, is he always used to tell us 7 times 7 different ways when you're, talking to your, shareholders, you got to rinse and repeat. Not your employees forget things very easily because we have so much going on. The same thing applies to our consumers and those that we want to be part of our community and our brand experience. And so it takes a lot of repetition, not only in let's say it's, a sponsorship with the Valkyries, and then all the other channels that are around and our interactions with TikTok. And this goes back to really understanding your audience and where can you captivate them. And once they become part of your brand tribe, I like to say, how do you continue to nurture them? Because there's so much competition. Like back when I was growing up in my career, there's maybe 2 or 3 competitors. Nowadays, it's so easy to start a business.
Right. There's virtually no barrier to entry in the world of tech. I mean, if you're a really good, smart engineer / programmer, you're going to make stuff up.
100%. And even in consumer packaged goods, like we have entered a world of entrepreneurship, and thus there will be many options for consumers to choose. So while they may be your customer today, it is absolutely not a guarantee that they'll be your customer tomorrow. And so for the conversations with the CFO is understanding that, the best method to generate sales and to retain sales is 1, 2, and 3, pursuing these programs. And then reporting back and being honest and transparent goes back to the red, yellow, green. And I always tell when I do a lot of mentorship, I always tell the future generation, we know that we can trust you when you actually present a slide that's not all green. And you're willing to say, we tried this program and we screwed up, and here are the 3 lessons that were taken away. And this is how we're going to apply it to future programs.
Yeah, it's like identify the problem or admit to the problem, but also come with a creative approach to solution or solutions. And that's then the fodder for ultimately pivoting, adjusting, changing, and marching on. Because there's no organization or individual in any organization, CEO, leaders included, that don't make mistakes. They just do.
Right.
And we do.
And we do. I think this is really important because, employees observe and watch a lot. And there's a lot of water cooler, sidebar conversations, and you can see things on Glassdoor. How leaders, this is why I think there's a difference between managers and leaders. I truly think a true leader and how they engage and how they support when a program fails will allow for the innovation motion to really take place. People are going to be more willing to innovate. When a manager, fires the person for trying a program, what is the likelihood of other employees wanting to do a program to try something new and different? What is the likelihood of an employee willing to speak up when they believe the trajectory or the program or the idea or the strategy that the company is moving forward is not, they have concerns about the recommendation? They won't raise their hand. They won't speak their mind. So I do think, and we were talking about this earlier, I think it's Brene Brown's vulnerability in creating an environment of psychological safety in which reds are celebrated because we learn from them. And there's obviously a balance. We don't want a whole scorecard of red, but we celebrate, we learn, we move forward.
And don't you think, well, I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
No.
My perspective, whether you want to call it environment or I think the sort of common word is company culture. And that starts at the top. So an employee's willingness to speak up or not, regardless of the subject matter, my opinion, largely supported by or not the culture that's created by the CEO and that first row of lieutenants, whatever, whether it's CFO, CMO, head of sales, CRO, head of HR, pick one. If the culture is clear that, to your point, Sandra, the reds are celebrated. We don't want the whole scorecard red, but we've got to learn from those mistakes, and we have to be brave enough and have enough courage to put those reds front center and speak up. And in a fear-based management style, that happens.
You're right.
0% of the time.
It goes back to how we started, is that when the leader that I had that was fear-based, we would run out the door because we did not want to be berated by the person. And I 100% agree. I mean, there's this whole quote, right? Culture trumps strategy all times. And while we know this, what I think is really interesting, Carl, is that I feel like we don't talk about culture enough. Like, even if you think about in board sessions, like how often do we put let's do a culture check-in. And culture really is how we behave every single day and every single moment. If we have a culture that we're always arriving 10 minutes late, that to me is indicative of like, well, we don't respect a person's time. Because if our culture is that we're always 10 minutes late because our meetings are always running over, we are going to be 10 minutes late for our ecosystem partners, other people that are out from the outside of the company. That's just one like tactical example. And it says something. It says something about how we value time. And so I just get really curious. The fact that we know and we've seen culture trumps strategy for lunch each and every day. Why is it that we don't spend enough time on culture?
It's a good, well, huge question, good question. At the end of the day, I would submit it's a matter of will and choice. But again, that comes from the top, and it has to be a subject and an area that's encouraged to be discussed and put on the table as opposed to locked in a closet.
Well, I think it's going to be really hard now because people view culture sometimes, it's that soft thing. We don't want to talk, it's like softy, or maybe it's emotions. And now with the whole current rhetoric around bringing back masculinity, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about diversity, thrown under the rug. I think it hurts companies. It's good to have a conversation around why is it important to have multi-ethnic people in your organization? Why is it important to have people that are of disability? Why is it important to have people that are veterans? Why is it important to actually embrace parents that have left the workforce, parents, I am including male and females, and choose to come back? Why would we value that in X type of company? Why is that important? Why is it important to have a culture of trust, accountability, collaboration, partnership, whatever values a company.
Right.
What I've seen, Carl, I mean, in my corporate life, which has been over 25 years, it seems like it's soft, and I don't think it's soft. Whatever soft means, I don't even know when people say it's soft. I don't even really know what it means. I think we're all human beings, and it's part of who we are. And I want to know, for the companies that I work and I'm in service to, like, what are the values? What are the cultures? Does my belief system align to the culture values of that company? Because when you don't align, what I have seen is when you don't align, your values are not in alignment with the company, and vice versa. There's always some inherent tension, like in your own company, right?
Always.
So,
and it's never a clean sweep either. I mean, give yourself the scorecard. Is it 8 out of 10 on the value system an acceptable, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or if it gets below 6, I'm not sure I'm a buyer here. And that's why I think it's so interesting in this context as individuals change career paths or take a call from an executive recruiter.
Yeah.
I'm happy. I'm in a place. I get a call from an executive recruiter, and all of a sudden, what I'm being presented with is an opportunity that far outstrips where I am, right?
100%.
Potentially. So the response is absolutely, I'll take the call. Let's go. And so many people don't actually realize or take the initiative that in that environment of interviewer and interviewee, that it's one's responsibility as the interviewee to ask as many questions about the culture, about leadership, about growth, about the 5-year plan, about where, all those component parts, so that as you're going through that give and take Q&A back and forth process, you're making an internal assessment on, are you a fit for this company's culture? And only then, I think, will you be able to thrive in that environment if you've done your homework. Now, that's easy to say, and it's harder to do. But you as a leader, and I'm going to brag on you a little bit here, gave me a list of, 15 accomplishments or accolades or awards that you've received, but I want to call out a couple of them because I think it influences sort of where this discussion is going. So you've been named one of the top 10 Latina executives by Latina Style. You were also named by Adweek one of the top women in sport, and you are a game changer, which is Sport Business Journal's female only cohort of significant female executives that have made a real impact in the world of sports. So I want to get your perspective, Sandra, on a couple of things. One, women leaders in business and how they get there. You are obviously one. So every woman who listens to this show is going to be able to take something away. Two, women in sport. And women in sport of late has taken on really a wide spectrum of commentary here. And I'll just make this data point that over the weekend, for the first time in history, a female was elected president of the International Olympic Committee. Kirsty Coventry, she's from Zimbabwe, a swimmer, so near and dear to my heart, but she made it on the first ballot. So something is going right in the world for women in business, women in sport, and in particular, and you mentioned the diversity, I think, requirement that exists in business today as a top 10 Latina executive. So that's a mouthful. Now you get to share.
I don't even know where to start. I will first address women in business. I do think, I'll break it up to two parts. The first part of my career, I did everything I possibly could to simulate like a man. I was a guy's guy. I did it all. I learned how to play golf. I did the happy hour. That goes back to, I keep on going back, like my fashion. Like I was always observing. I'm like, okay, I have to do whatever I can to fit in. That also meant that I had to work next harder because I was judged as soon as I walked in the room. Over time, I felt, for me personally, this is my story, that I lost myself in all of it. I never used to talk about my ethnicity. I never used to really talk about my gender until in 2005 when I joined Intel. This gentleman by the name of Ernie Felix asked me this question. I was new to Intel. I was one of the few Latinas in Intel at a senior level. He asked me, like, what does it feel like to be a Latina in business? I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never made my ethnicity, my gender an issue, never participated in Latino conferences or the ERG programs. It's always about the business, the business, the business. That's what my parents taught me, keep everything separate. But his question really bothered me in a good way, that it made me very uncomfortable. And I learned over time that I wasn't my authentic self. Like I was always masquerading in this, like, I'm a guy's guy. And then I was like, well, who am I? And granted, when I was growing up as a little kid, in grammar school, high school, I never talked about my ethnicity. I grew up in an upper middle class white neighborhood. I wanted to hide that I was Mexican. And all of a sudden, it took like maybe 2 years. I really went deep into myself. And I'm like, I'm a woman. I represent 50% of the world's population. I'm a Latina in the US, representing at that time, was it like 2.1 trillion GDP. I am so gifted that I can see the world in multiple perspectives because I am bicultural. I grew up in the US and I visited people in Mexico. And in the second half of my career, I'm sharing this because the first half is like assimilate, like look around my environment, be like one of them, and work harder. The second phase of my career, the latter part, was I am put on this planet to have an opinion. And how can I contribute to the health of the company and grow? And I'm just remembering recently, somebody came up to me and said, Sandra, you asked the most uncomfortable conversations, but that everybody's thinking about. So we can at least have the conversation.
Right.
And I realize it's because I think I'm finally confident in myself. I'm okay if I get fired. I'm okay if an opportunity gets presented in front of me. And I just try to stick to my truth. Like, what value can I deliver to this company, this organization? How can I be best in service to them? And it goes back to Carl, like, if there's a fit, there's a fit. If there's not, there's not. And that's okay. And so in the second phase of my career, I will tell people, which was kind of the opposite of what I did in the first phase, and maybe because I'm more senior now and I can do it, is to truly know what your value proposition is to the community in which you're serving and lean into that. And always think about, like, when you go into a situation, how can I add value? So you were talking about the keynote that you and I met. You do not know how paranoid I was, because I was like, Angel's like, you're going to do the keynote. I'm like, what? And they're like, it's male. And I'm like, okay, now I'm a triple male dominated world. I'm in the tech industry, which is male dominated, sports, which is super male dominated at that time. I just remember walking in, it was a sea of blue suits. And I was never seen that in my entire career. I'm like, wow, this is very uncomfortable. And in the media industry, but I just knew like, okay, I gotta just deliver the truth of intel and what we're trying to do, and deliver it in the way that I feel that I can deliver it in a most authentic way. And I think that those were the moments in my career really started to take off. And I started to figure out the shoes that I wanted to be in. And could I ever possibly be viewed as a leader by people that have been part of my team, or people that I surround myself with? I tell people, like, I'm not sure if I even deserve the title of a leader. I need to earn that every single day. And in some cases, I'm just a manager. In some cases, I may not be viewed as a manager with some individuals. But I try my best every single day to, my North Star is be the best that I can at my trade and deliver value, and don't take things personally because it's just business, and know that I always have to work X harder from my counterparts, because I will be judged. I'm a woman, I'm a Latina. What does this person need to do? Like, why is she in sports? Did she ever play sports? Yes, I did when I was growing up. My father was a well-known thoroughbred horse jockey. And more than anything, I'm a business person. And that's what I'm here to do, is to help drive business for whatever I'm in service to.
Well, that was not only insightful, but clearly heartfelt, but also very focused. And there's no doubt or question, given the last ish minutes, why you are where you are, Sandra, and why you've accomplished what you've accomplished. Shoot, we could go on for another hour or longer, which I'd love to do at some point, but we've got just a few minutes left, so I'm going to sort of slightly pivot here to the three hot questions that we ask every guest on the show. So the first one is your favorite mistake. That's the mistake you made during your career. It stands out. It's a moment where you know you messed up, but you successfully navigated the mistake and what you learned from it.
Okay, I'm not pivoting on this question, but it's the one that has come to mind when you asked me this question. And I was thinking of another one as an example, because this is not so business related, but it is business related. I remember Meg Whitman. When I remember seeing like a bunch of female leaders on stage, and they were giving their like advice to future young leaders. That was me. She's like, I would get on the plane, I would never call my family, right? I got to get the job done. Nice. I remember at that moment, I was like, wow, that's like a mean mom. And I wasn't a mom yet. I think my biggest mistake as a professional working parent was, unbeknownst to me, I ended up doing the exact same thing to my daughter and to my partner at the time, where I would get on the plane and I'm all business. And it was because I created this world in which if I get up in the middle of this dinner, which is all men, I would be viewed too committed to my family and not committed enough to my professional. I think I did a disservice to the business community in the context of the future leaders saw that I literally just would, when I'm on business, I'm on business. And potentially that did not create room for those leaders to be their true, authentic self, where maybe there was a female that wanted to call their parent, like, well, Sandra doesn't do that, so I'm not going to do that. So I think in that context, I think about it a lot. And I talk to my daughter about it a lot. And what her result is feeling most likely probably abandonment. But if I could take that back, and I think it's an area that I failed, I wish I would have thought more about intentionally the type of parent I want to be to my daughter, while having a demanding profession that required me to travel 80% of the time. Massive oversight on my part. So
The work-life family balance is a huge thing. And unless you're a parent, one doesn't know how hard parenting truly is. And if you want to put parenting next to the hardest job, quote unquote, you ever had, parenting would win as the hardest job you ever had, right?
Yep. That's why, like, when you ask me that question, I'm not going to remember that program that was in red and I had to go fix it. I'm not going to remember that there was this ad that blew up while I was working in China. I don't remember any of that. What I remember currently when you asked me that question was, if that was a moment that I failed, both personally and professionally, and if I could take that back, I would.
There's a song about that. if we could turn back time, right? And we can't. So, good answer. Great answer, actually. The second question, this is kind of the fun one. The favorite live concert you ever attended, go back as far as you want, where a female artist or a female led band was the headliner.
Shakira. Yeah, it took me a while, but Shakira, she gets me to get up and dance. And I saw her in concert before her evolution of her second phase of her career. But I think a talented human being that had to defy some odds and gifted at her trade. I think energetically just positive human being and how she loves her two kids is pretty great. But man, I danced the entire concert, I think I don't know how many calories I burnt, but I did not sit down. And yeah, so Shakira.
Good stuff. I love that. Okay, last one is an important one. Words matter. We all know it. As a leader, is oftentimes what you say is as important as what you don't say. So, your favorite word and why?
I think this is 4 words. How can I help? Why?
I like that. How can I help is really how can I be of service? How can I support? How can I help you as an individual be the best you can be? And if I can play a role in that, which is so indicative of your leadership capability, Sandra, it's unbelievable. So I love the way you just said that. And you've helped. You have helped this audience, and you've helped me by being a guest today on The Best Boss Ever. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Carl. It's been great. Great pleasure being part of this.